Joining me now, Tammy Bruce, Mercedes Schlapp, and Stuart Holliday. And Tammy, let me start with you because this whole thing, the last 24 hours, was just a big drama. Initially, Putin wasn't going to meet with Tillerson. He did, and not just for 1 hour, but 2 hours. It obviously was intense. They go back a long ways. Rex Tillerson doing a lot of business in that country. So you had to know it was a very frank discussion, and then we saw a very frank press conference.
Yeah, look, everybody complained about Tillerson before, he was approved and confirmed, that Tillerson knew Putin well. Well, now we're seeing why that works and how it works. So Tillerson's going in there, and this is a problem for Putin, and Putin knows it. He's got a counterpart who is familiar with him, that you can't really play a game. Trump, on the other hand, is a man who is clearly keeping people on the back of their heels, isn't sure what's going on. That's an edge for Trump. For Putin, he's got a serious problem, and he knows it. For 8 years, he's been able to do whatever he's wanted. So not only now is that ended, but he's been exposed, if you will, in a way to being the Wizard of Oz. There really is no there when it comes to real power, military power, economic power. They've got the GDP of Iceland at this point. And they've really relied on oil to bring up the nature of their income. All of that, of course, has been really destroyed over the last 8 years, especially with the price of oil coming down. But Tillerson is in a very, very good position. I think as a result, the country is in a good position. And you're looking now at who's really, after just 50 days, Donald Trump has already put himself at the top of the heap here in dealing with the world, and the United States is back into being the deal maker, and that's where we need to be. Yeah, Mercedes, certainly the Tillerson was no John Kerry, and Lavrov sort of alluded to that, actually pointing the finger at the Obama administration on more than one occasion about how some of these things have festered for so long. But there's a whole new dynamic to this, and you do have to wonder, because the only thing I saw them agree on was that perhaps there should be better lines of communication.
Right. Well, I think the predictability factor for the Russians in dealing with the United States, that's over. I think that Putin now is unsure of what action the United States will be taking in the future when it comes specifically to Syria. Obviously, they were not expecting the United States to respond after the Syrian chemical attack last week. And watching this response coming from President Trump, which was basically from a position of strength, I think pretty much caused almost like an unbalanced approach for Putin and for the Russians. And so I think the Russians, and now that you have the White House saying basically, look, the Russians are covering up for the Syrian regime, and basically pointing the finger at Russians, saying we need to put pressure on Russia to ensure that we can get a peace deal in Syria and move through diplomatic channels to cause real change in Syria. That's something that Putin did not face during the Obama administration, which was all talk, no action.
Stuart, I think another area where it seemed to be a clear victory is coming into this meeting over the weekend. Russia was saying that what chemical attack? And then, of course, today Lavrov was saying, well, let's investigate it. Let's see what happened there. And there were a couple other instances where the sort of defiance of Russia that we've seen recently, but even over the last 24, 48 hours, seemed to have faded somewhat.
That's right. Well, Sergey Lavrov is a master. I had the opportunity to see him in action at the UN, and this is obfuscation. This is, creating a diversion, if you will. And I think what you see here, again, is a real wake-up call for the Russians, as your other guests have said, that the United States is willing to call them out. In this case, they're trying to compare, regime change, the prior history, but really what you have here is a wake-up call and a channel change from the Obama administration's acquiescence to what Russia was able to do, which was to consolidate power in Syria.
Well, look, also, I think a very surprising dynamic here was the fact that Donald Trump was at dinner with President Xi of China when this occurred. And so and also the messaging that the president of China agreed and had no problem with the strike. And then, of course, their abstention today at the UN when it came to condemning that. Now, you'd rather have an agreement with the United States, but that was a statement that China is already with us, and that completely unbalances Russia when it comes to the nature of who they're opposed. If there's already a great relationship, or at least a beneficial one, between the United States and China, Russia is out in the cold.
And now with Russia out in the cold, and this was the theme, right, coming out of those attacks, that, hey, Russia, how could you side with this butcher, this madman, and with a handful of allies, Iran, for instance, while the rest of the world is condemning the actions that have occurred there? And it seems like, to me, Mercedes, that the leverage is there for Russia to now really, truly consider some sort of regime change, at least with respect to Assad and his immediate family, even if they keep someone from the Alawite sect involved or at the head of it. But they probably will come to the table, I think.
I hope they do. I mean, the pressure is on Russia from not only the United States, but from our international allies. But with that being said, I think that there's a sense that Russia is not about to give up their power. I think that they want to try to keep Assad somewhat controlled, but are unable to. And so I think for Russia, they're in a very difficult position. But remember, they're the ones that, after the United States responded to the Syrian chemical attack, the Russians basically called the red line, said if the United States violates the red line, there will be a response. So it almost sounds like they're becoming even more of an aggressor. What was interesting was the fact that after Putin said he wasn't going to meet with Secretary of State Tillerson,
right,
in fact, the meeting does happen. So it does signify that I think the Russians are looking to reach out to the United States to figure out a way where they could possibly move towards a Syrian peace agreement.
Stuart, on that note, during Spicer's briefing yesterday, and also when President Trump was being interviewed by Maria Bartiromo on our network this morning, it felt to me that this new approach would not just be limited to chemical attacks, but perhaps those barrel bombs filled with gasoline and all kinds of things, and other really inhumane approaches to destroying human life. And if that is indeed the case, it brings us closer to having to intervene again. Do you think if that happens, what do you think Russia will do if indeed we have to give Assad yet another lesson on at least the rules of engagement and the rules of humanity?
Well, I think it would depend on what kind of action we take. Again, I think Russia's interest is in preserving its port in Tartus, in keeping its economic interests, and from a national perspective, this is one of their client states for 40 years. So they're not going to go quietly, they're not going to go quietly out the door. That said, I think that line that President Trump has drawn about we're not going to go into Syria, he says, but he clearly seems to be listening to people who understand this duty to protect. We have a set of actions here, chemical barrel bombs, that really cross the line.
Right.
And I think that he's gotten that message. He's learned that's really the focal point. So I think that's the differentiator, is what kind of action does Assad take, and then what kind of action do we take? But I think the Russians, of course, are rattling the saber. They've got their destroyer moving down into the Med, and their air defense system is quite robust in Syria if they activate it. And that's why you've seen these unmanned Tomahawk missile strikes.